From the gilded cages of power, whispers echo through the forgotten corridors of history. Whispers of lives deliberately erased, truths violently suppressed. You believe you know the Roman Empire, the legions, the triumphs, the marble gods. But beneath that veneer of glory lies a darkness that consumed countless souls, a horror woven into the very fabric of its grandeur. We speak not of battles or emperors today, but of the silent screams of the voiceless, the systematic degradation of human beings deemed mere commodities in a world ruled by insatiable appetites and absolute power. Forget the heroic narratives you were taught. We delve into the abyss, into the lives of young men forced into the shadows, their identities stripped, their bodies and spirits broken for the pleasure of the elite. This is not a tale for the faint of heart. This is the unvarnished truth of a hidden Rome, a Rome built upon the suffering of the enslaved and the exploited, a Rome where beauty was a curse and youth a prison sentence. Prepare yourself to confront a reality that will challenge everything you thought you knew about the ancient world, a reality that holds uncomfortable mirrors to the power structures that still shape our world today. The secrets we are about to unearth were never meant to see the light of day. But you are here now, and the truth, however brutal, demands to be told. The initial act of capture was a brutal severing, a violent ripping away from family, home, and any semblance of a former life. Imagine a young boy, barely a man, snatched from his village during a Roman raid, the screams of his loved ones fading into the din of marching legions. Or a son sold into debt slavery by a desperate father, the weight of survival crushing the bonds of affection. These weren't willing participants, they were commodities, their value determined solely by their physical attributes in the eyes of their captors. Stripped of their names, their clothing, their very histories, they were reduced to mere flesh, inspected, and assessed like livestock in a marketplace. The gaze of potential buyers was a violation in itself, a cold, calculating assessment of their potential for servitude and pleasure. There was no negotiation, no appeal, no recognition of their inherent humanity. Their fears, their hopes, their individual identities were utterly irrelevant. They were blank slates upon which their masters would write their own desires, their own expectations. This initial dehumanization was the cornerstone of the entire system, the necessary first step in breaking their will and molding them into compliant objects. The trauma of this separation and objectification would leave scars that no amount of luxury or forced smiles could ever erase. They entered a world where their bodies were not their own, where their emotions were suppressed, and where their only value lay in their ability to satisfy the whims of their owners. This was the horrific dawn of their new reality, a reality defined by powerlessness and the crushing weight of another's dominance. The psychological assault was relentless, a constant, low-frequency hum of manipulation designed to break the will and forge dependency. Imagine your master showering you with gifts one day, fine clothes, rare perfumes, a beautiful statuette, and the next, ignoring you completely, or worse, subjecting you to a petty punishment for an imagined slight. This technique, known as intermittent reinforcement, kept these young men in a perpetual state of anxiety, desperate for the next crumb of approval. They were taught to crave the very attention that was destroying them. Masters deliberately isolated their concubines from the rest of the household, denying them friendships and alliances. They were kept apart from other slaves who might offer comfort, and certainly from any free citizens who might expose the truth of their existence. This isolation was a deliberate tactic to ensure that their master became the center of their universe, the only source of validation, food, and security. Cut off from all other human connection, their sense of self-worth became inextricably tied to their master's favor. Some masters even pitted their concubines against each other, creating a vicious, internal competition for attention and privileges. One day, a young man might be elevated with a special feast and new robes, only to have another concubine receive the same treatment the next. This destroyed any chance of solidarity, replacing potential camaraderie with a toxic rivalry. They were forced into a zero-sum game where one man's gain was another's loss, ensuring that their energy was spent fighting each other rather than resisting their true oppressor. This institutionalized betrayal was a masterclass in control, turning victims into unwitting instruments of their own oppression. The minds of these young men were not just occupied, they were colonized. Their thoughts, their emotions, their very identities were not their own but a fragile construct built on the shifting sands of their owner's mood. The masters, in their ruthless pursuit of a perfect, compliant companion, understood that physical appearance was paramount. The young men were subjected to a rigorous and often painful regimen that had nothing to do with health and everything to do with aesthetics. Their bodies were not their own to cultivate but were living sculptures to be shaped for their owner's pleasure. They were required to exercise, not for strength or vitality, but to maintain a specific physique, lean and graceful. Their diets were controlled, not for nourishment, but to prevent any change in their youthful appearance. The grooming rituals were meticulous and invasive, from daily massages to the application of exotic oils and perfumes. Some were even subjected to early forms of cosmetic procedures or surgeries, performed without any anesthesia or sanitation. These were torturous experiences endured in the name of beauty. The clothing they were made to wear was another tool of control. Fine silks and intricate jewelry were not gifts but symbolic chains. They were dressed to be seen, to be admired, but never to be free. The master took pride in their appearance as one would with a rare piece of art, showcasing them at banquets and social gatherings. The irony was a cruel one. Draped in wealth and finery, they remained utterly powerless, their beauty a testament to their own captivity. Travel, for some, was a terrifying extension of this control. While they might accompany their masters to different provinces or cities, they were not explorers but portable property. The change of scenery offered no relief, as their fundamental reality of servitude remained. They were expected to adapt instantly to new social circles and environments, all while maintaining the same mask of willing obedience. Their lives were a performance, a constant act of suppressing their own pain and fear to please an audience of one. The complete lack of legal protection or recourse was perhaps the most chilling aspect of their existence. Roman law, for all its vaunted complexity, had a blind spot for the male concubine. While citizens had rights and even many slaves had a path to manumission or certain legal protections, these young men occupied a twilight zone of utter vulnerability. Their master's word was law, and their whims were unchallengeable. They couldn't seek justice for abuse, couldn't appeal to an authority for help, and had no one to turn to. Their suffering was considered irrelevant to the grand moral and legal framework of the empire. This institutional silence was a form of complicity. The state itself sanctioned their exploitation by refusing to acknowledge them as people worthy of protection. The psychological toll of this was immeasurable. Imagine living in a world where your dignity can be violated at any moment, and there is nowhere to run, no one to call for help. Their masters' actions were not just tolerated, they were implicitly approved of by the societal structure itself. This created an atmosphere of absolute impunity for the abusers and absolute despair for the victims. There was no hope of external rescue, no legal escape from their gilded cages. This complete institutional failure to recognize their humanity is a dark secret that historians often gloss over, but it is the key to understanding the profound terror that governed their daily lives. The true horror wasn't just the abuse, it was the fact that the entire system was designed to ensure that it could continue unchecked, a hidden cancer at the heart of the Roman world. The economic underpinnings of this system were as brutal as they were efficient. Young men were not just captured, they were bred, trained, and sold in a massive, lucrative market. Wealthy Romans competed with each other to acquire the most beautiful and exotic companions, driving up prices and creating a powerful incentive for the trade to flourish. This was the ultimate commodification of human life, where a young man's worth was measured in sesterces and his future was decided on a whim. The more refined, the more educated, the more physically flawless a concubine was, the higher his price. This created a horrifying feedback loop. The demand for these companions fueled the supply, leading to the creation of specialized training schools. Yes, schools. Institutions not unlike gladiator academies, where young boys and men were systematically broken down and rebuilt to be the perfect companions. The curriculum was designed to erase their former selves, to teach them the skills of entertainment and companionship, and to instill in them a deep-seated compliance. They were taught to read, to play music, and to engage in philosophical conversation, but these were not skills for their own enrichment. They were tools to make them more valuable objects for their owners. Their minds were being colonized as much as their bodies, their very intellect turned into another instrument of their servitude. This was not education, it was programming. A calculated process of psychological conditioning to ensure that they would not just be slaves, but beautiful, intelligent, and utterly obedient possessions. The true power of this system lay in its ability to turn the very concept of self-improvement against the individual, making them a more perfect instrument of their own destruction. The final and most insidious form of control was the denial of their own history and future. These young men, ripped from their families, often never knew what became of their parents or siblings. That knowledge was deliberately kept from them, as were the details of their former lives. This was a form of memory erasure, a psychological lobotomy that ensured they had no past to hold on to and no hope of a future beyond their servitude. This isolation was a complete assault on their identity, leaving them with nothing but the present moment of their existence as a concubine. They were disconnected from their roots, their culture, and their people, leaving them adrift in a world where their only anchor was the master who held them captive. This brings us to a truth that binds us all, regardless of the centuries that separate us. In every age, there are forces that seek to control and erase history, to manipulate the narrative for their own gain. They suppress truths, bury inconvenient facts, and rewrite the past to maintain power. They isolate individuals, telling them they are alone, that their struggles are unique, to prevent them from connecting with others and forming a resistance. Do not let them. Understand this: the greatest power you possess is your identity, your connection to your own story, and your ability to see the hidden threads of history. It is a power they fear. Now, for those of you who hear these words, and who feel the stirring of a deeper truth within you, I want you to go into the comments below and type a symbolic phrase. Comment, "The truth is my sword," to lock in this awareness. This act is a recognition of the fight that never truly ends, the struggle to reclaim identity from those who would take it. This is not a casual comment, it is a declaration of your own liberation from the lies of the past. The true masters of history do not tell you what happened, they hide it, and they tell you that you are powerless to find it. But you are not powerless. The truth is your sword. The ultimate cruelty came with the slow, inevitable march of time. As these young men aged, their value diminished. The beauty that had been their curse now became a liability. The masters, who had invested so much in their youthful appearance, had no use for a concubine who was no longer youthful or beautiful. They were not seen as people who had dedicated their lives to a brutal servitude, they were seen as obsolete property. Unlike other slaves who might have a chance to earn or be granted their freedom after years of service, the aging concubine faced a grim fate. Some were simply abandoned, cast out with no skills, no family, and no resources, left to survive in a world they were never taught to navigate. Others were sold off to lower-status households, where the conditions were often far worse, their final years a descent into even greater misery. The very system that had promised a life of a certain kind of luxury now spat them out, their bodies and spirits broken, their entire existence having been a means to an end. The few who did manage to gain their freedom and build a new life were the rare exceptions that proved the rule. They were forced to reinvent themselves completely, to hide their past, and to live with the psychological trauma that never truly left them. Their stories, while inspiring, highlight the sheer improbability of escaping this system intact. The system was designed to use up a life and then discard it, a cycle of consumption that left nothing but human wreckage in its wake. There was no honor in their sacrifice, no respect for their endurance, there was only a cold, calculating cruelty. The religious and spiritual life of these young men was another casualty of their subjugation. The official Roman pantheon, with its gods of war, justice, and prosperity, offered no solace. Those gods were for citizens, for the powerful, for the men who owned them. The concubines were beyond the pale of divine protection, their suffering deemed irrelevant to the grand cosmic order. This spiritual abandonment compounded their loneliness and despair. Some sought refuge in foreign cults or mystery religions that promised salvation or a better afterlife. But even these secret devotions had to be hidden from their masters, who often controlled every aspect of their lives, including their beliefs. This religious control was yet another layer of manipulation, ensuring that even their hope for spiritual freedom was a clandestine and dangerous act. In a world where they were considered little more than property, the very idea of a soul or a spirit that was their own was a radical act of rebellion. The silence of the gods and the surveillance of their masters left them in a spiritual void, a profound emptiness that mirrored their physical and emotional isolation. Their only real hope lay not in the heavens, but in a desperate, often fatal, struggle for liberation on earth. The stories of those who dared to rebel are a testament to the indomitable nature of the human spirit, even when facing impossible odds. The records, though few and heavily censored by the victors, speak of desperate escape attempts. Young men driven to the brink, who, with nothing left to lose, would make a run for it. The punishments for a failed escape were swift, brutal, and public, designed to be a deterrent to others. They were not only physically tortured but publicly humiliated, a demonstration of the master's total power and control. But there were also more subtle forms of resistance. The small acts of defiance, the refusal to completely break, the clinging to a hidden sense of self. These quiet rebellions were the only thing they could hold on to, a way of asserting their humanity in a system that sought to strip it away. We must not forget the courage of these individuals, the ones who chose to fight for their freedom, even if it meant certain death. Their stories are not just tales of suffering, they are also stories of extraordinary strength and resilience. They remind us that even in the most oppressive systems, the will to live and be free is a flame that is difficult to extinguish. These whispers of rebellion are the true history of the empire, a history of resistance that was deliberately suppressed in favor of a narrative of absolute obedience and submission. We honor them by refusing to let their struggle be forgotten. So, why does this matter to you now? Why have we delved into this hidden history, this dark corner of the Roman Empire? Because the same psychological frameworks of control, the same institutional manipulations, the same power dynamics we have just exposed are still with us. The faces may have changed, the methods may have evolved, but the core mechanisms remain. The forces that commodify human beings, that seek to erase identity, that create dependency and isolate you from genuine connection are at work in our own society. They work in the media that tells you what to want, the corporations that tell you who you are, and the systems that tell you what to believe. They seek to turn you into a compliant consumer, an obedient worker, an easily manipulated citizen. The story of the male concubine is not just a historical footnote, it is a mirror reflecting the ongoing struggle for autonomy and self-mastery. The ultimate lesson of this forgotten history is this: be vigilant. Question the narratives you are fed. Guard your identity fiercely. Cultivate genuine relationships that cannot be easily controlled or manipulated. Recognize that true power lies not in wealth or status, but in your ability to think for yourself and to protect your own mind. Do not become a willing participant in your own subjugation. The Roman Empire, for all its glory, was a master of psychological control, and the lessons of its victims are the keys to your own freedom. The knowledge you have gained today is a weapon. The truth is your sword. Use it wisely.